He believed his robe would keep him safe forever. But when Judge Boasberg began covering for political bigwigs, Pam Bondi flipped the whole system upside down. She stood at the lectern in Tallahassee, hair back in a tight grip, voice clear and strong. No script in sight, no teleprompter, no written words, a pile of sealed files. Her gaze locked on each reporter and camera in the room. "This isn't politics, it's about trust," she said, and Judge Boasberg has shattered it. That line sparked everything. It bounced across TV screens in homes, courtrooms, and meeting rooms. Folks didn't know what to think at first. A sitting judge hit with criminal accusations? It sounded like a movie plot, not something you'd catch on Tuesday morning news. But Bondi didn't back off. Her words sliced through the buzz of stunned whispers. She didn't crack a smile. She didn't have to. Just 2 days before, rumors had started swirling within the Department of Justice. Low-level murmurs of a locked file, an internal inquiry, and a top-secret case review tied to Judge James Boasberg, a federal judge with decades on the bench, more infamous for his friends than his decisions. Most hadn't heard of him until now, but Bondi had been monitoring him for months. The catalyst? A late Friday call in a D.C. courtroom. Judge Boasberg ordered a stop to deporting 5 men linked to Trendiaragua, a gang that even tough-talking ICE agents didn't touch unless they had to. Bondi didn't take it as an innocent mistake. She called it a reckless obstruction of justice. More stinging was the way he did it. A casual verbal command, no paper trail to back it. Homeland Security, assuming the absence of signature was their green light, went ahead anyway. Within hours, reporters swarmed ICE offices and crowds gathered outside federal spots. But behind closed doors, something bigger had clicked. Bondi had jumped on calls with DHS bosses and White House advisors that same night. "He's shielding troublemakers," she reportedly said in a private chat. "He's not explaining the law, he's ducking behind it." That one call kicked things into gear, and not just on the political side. What nobody knew yet? Pam Bondi's crew had been building a file for a while. Hushed conversations with ex-clerks, memos leaked by a source in the D.C. circuit, even encoded chats between Boasberg and past staffers, caught in an unrelated probe. Bondi wasn't just furious, she was gearing up for war. In her media conversation, she didn't reveal all of the allegations, but she dropped hints. Obstruction of justice was involved, misconduct too. She spoke of a pattern of rulings that weren't consistent with standard legal rulings, especially on big national security issues. Those who witnessed that press conference couldn't decide what surprised them more, what she laid out, or that someone was finally laying it out. News anchors stumbled over breaking news. Law commentators rushed to analyze it. And in lawyer group chats nationwide, young lawyers just kept asking the same question: is this for real? Bondi had always been a hard hitter, but this was next level. She was coming for a sitting federal judge, not just with words, but with a plan to ruin his record, step by step, detail by detail. In the days that followed, her testimony was shredded on every station. Some called it a political revenge tactic, while others praised her bravery, finally making the courts responsible for something. The country was divided, but one thing was certain: this wasn't a publicity stunt. Bondi was dead serious. She'd lit the fuse, and the explosion was just getting started. But what led her to this moment? Why Boasberg? Why now? Before the news blew up, before the finger-pointing, James E. Boasberg was untouchable. A Georgetown grad, Yale law star, with a shiny resume and a web of contacts from K Street to Capitol Hill. To most in the legal community, he was the guy you didn't touch. Not that he scared anyone off, but because he knew how to play it smart. On the surface, at least. He started climbing the ranks in Washington, D.C. years ago. First as a low-level judge on the D.C. Superior Court, then elevated by President Obama to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. By 2020, he was chief judge of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, a position that kept him in the know on some of the nation's most frustrating security information. But as time passed, his decisions started to raise questions. It wasn't one big slip-up, it was a pattern. In Honolulu, when the FBI was criticized for botching surveillance paperwork, Boasberg handled the fallout. His calls were measured. Some said too soft, a tap on the wrist, no pushback, no wake-up call. People started whispering that Boasberg had gotten too cozy, defending the system instead of keeping it in line. Pam Bondi was one of those voices. She'd been tracking him quietly, watching his name pop up time and again. In cases that went well beyond the courtroom, especially those involving immigration laws and how far the government could flex its power, Bondi saw more than just activist rulings from Boasberg. To her, he was acting from his bench. Then came that stay on the deportations. That move stood out. It wasn't just sloppy legally, it seemed deliberate. Bondi wasn't the only one who thought so. DHS officials were surprised as well. "We've got no papers," one email within the agency read. "Are we really grounding planes over some offhand judge comment?" In the end, they didn't. They let the flights proceed. That's when Boasberg started talking contempt charges, accusing the administration of disrespecting his court. But legal experts spotted a huge flaw. There was no document order to follow, written in sound. Behind the scenes, Bondi's team fumed. This was no slip-up, a roadblock it was. She approved a deep dive into Boasberg's court record, not just his decisions, but reports on how he handled cases, memos from clerks, unusual gaps in scheduling, and even personal messages. They saw hints of possible favoritism, and the more they dug, something odd kept popping up. A pattern of unreported back and forths in cases involving encrypted technology like Signal. Signal wasn't just a geeky gadget story anymore. It was turning into a legal mess. Way back in early 2024, a suit emerged, quietly at first, then building steam, accusing some top Trump-era officials of using Signal to negotiate big moves without a trace. When that landed on Boasberg's desk, alarm bells rang. Not because he seemed biased yet, but because he was friends with a few names in the mix. Even so, he did not recuse himself. He kept the case, then pushed hearings behind closed doors, locked down witness names, and cut off press peeks. Bondi wasn't just annoyed, she was sure of it now. She figured Boasberg was covering for certain folks, either hiding key details or dragging things out till the heat died down. The DOJ started pulling phone logs, grabbing emails, and piecing together timelines that didn't add up. Bit by bit, a trend showed up. Delays in hearings, lost paperwork, weird tweaks to access records. Bondi's hunch? Boasberg was playing goalie for people who wanted those chats 6 feet under. By the time that deportation order arrived, she'd already planned her next move in stone. It was a question of timing the right moment to go live. But it wasn't only courtroom theatrics driving her. Something at a personal level broke too. The room was cramped, dimly lit with worn carpet, scenting faintly of printer ink and coffee left on the warmer too long. Inside DOJ headquarters, just off Constitution Avenue in DC, Bondi sat with a handful of high-level aides, arms crossed, face set. A white noise machine hummed outside the door, keeping their conversation on the down low, but the air in there was electric. "We can't ignore this anymore," she said, staring straight at Deputy Counsel Arlen Stokes. On the table lay a thin file, not thick, but weighty, the kind where a few pages might make some noise if they dropped just right. Inside were snippets of Signal chats, dug up through a hush-hush third-party subpoena. Someone on the edges of the case had flipped, not to the media, but straight to Bondi's desk. And there it was, a note from a federal staffer to Boasberg, sent 2 months before he grabbed the Signal case. The wording was vague but loaded. "They're gonna drop some stuff in late March, but don't sweat it, Jay. I've got it handled on our side." Bondi read it several times, maybe 3, before she noticed her hands trembling. Stokes tried to dismiss it at first. "Could be nothing, could be a mix-up," he said. She wasn't having it. "It's not this note by itself," she shot back. "It's the whole pile behind it, the patterns, the blacked-out lines, the spoken rulings with no support, the hearings shoved aside. It's too neat." Then she dropped the line that flipped the switch for her team. "I'm not letting this get stuffed in some oversight report 3 years down the road." That's when the gears really turned. The next 72 hours were non-stop. Legal groundwork, media planning, closed-door huddles with the Office of Legal Counsel. They didn't want rumors. They wanted a punch. What nobody outside saw. 2 days before the big press moment, Bondi had a call with someone she leaned on, an older federal judge in Phoenix, who'd been eyeing the Boasberg mess from afar. No grandstanding, no spotlight, just bench experience and a solid grip on how the game worked. "You sure about this, Pam?" the judge asked. "I am. You'll torch a lot of connections." "I'm not here to buddy up," she said. "I'm here to fix this mess." She didn't say it mad. She said it straight, like she'd thought it through. She knew the political hits she'd take, maybe even personal ones too, but she also knew what would happen if she dropped it. This wasn't courtroom honesty anymore. Earlier in the year, a Corpus Christi mother penned a letter to Bondi. Her son, a border agent, had been severely hurt in a botched operation linked to two men with ties to Trendiaragua. They'd fallen through the cracks because of a court stay, one signed off by Boasberg. The mother wrote, "We can't keep pretending politics don't touch real life. My son's back is ruined. He can't walk. And the man who did it has a judge watching his back." Pam didn't toss that letter in the trash. She locked it in her desk. So when people afterwards said she was taking it personal, they weren't quite wrong. It was personal but not grudges. It was accountability. Once she went public naming Judge James Boasberg and calling for an investigation, there was no turning back. Her reputation, her job, her credibility, all hanging on how this played out. But as the story broke, another thread started to fray. Signalgate wasn't a matter of a few texts. It was a matter of who was lurking behind them. The public seized on Signalgate in a flash. It blew up online, huge. TV debates, podcasts, Reddit threads. It wasn't an app anymore. It was who was on it, what they were keeping quiet about, and why. Someone like Judge Boasberg had tried to bury it under a pile of legal red tape. The story ran deeper than most folks got. Signal wasn't fresh in DC, but it spiked during Trump's time, freaking out some intel crowd corners. Staffers, aides, even big shots started using it in huddles, saying it cut down on leaks. Problem is, Signal wipes messages on its own, and in government, you're supposed to keep records. That's what the first lawsuit was about. Began with a small watchdog group in San Diego. Most scoffed at first, then documents started to surface, such as conflicting timetables, erased calendar notes, and huge gaps in the files. People started to ask questions. Then names dropped, not just low-level staffers, but heavy hitters. Former national security advisors, an undersecretary of defense, even someone who'd worked directly beneath Boasberg as a legal advisor on surveillance guidelines. And amidst all that, Boasberg didn't recuse himself. He didn't even nod to the ties in court, just set a pre-trial date, shut it to the public, and tossed out a short line about routine reviews. That's when Bondi's team ran out of chill. They cracked into signal logs. Not a simple job and not taken lightly, but a national security loophole gave them room, and the DOJ leaned in hard. What they pulled wasn't the full picture, but it was plenty. One message stuck out, from a lawsuit assistant to an ex-DOJ staffer who'd been under Boasberg. It said, "JB says we'll tuck it away in pre-trial, no stress, no records, stay quiet unless pushed." 3 days later, Boasberg paused the evidence handover. Now, legally, that could mean a bunch of things. Judges push pauses all the time, but next to that message, it felt like a slick dodge. Pam didn't see a careful judge. She saw a guy guarding the gate, keeping folks from both sides from having their conversations and moves ventilated. The more he sat there, the weaker the tracks became. She summoned a midnight powwow with her legal team. "If we don't act now, the door closes shut," she said. "This case gets sealed and nobody hears a squeak." One advisor, uncertain, spoke up. "You think he's operating a cover?" "I think he knew who'd be named," she answered. "And I think he chose his team." That "picked his team" line? It'd later pop up in the Wall Street Journal, The Hill, even NPR. A low-key cheer for folks who saw Bondi's push not as payback, but as a tug to yank the courts out of backroom control. It was wild how smooth this had stayed under wraps, how a judge with years in the game could stall, redirect, and blur court moves tied to a national security mess. Every step Bondi took, pushback came quick. One legal group filed a complaint, calling her actions a stab at judge independence. A Yale law professor went on TV, saying Bondi was introducing politics into the courtroom. But people were paying attention, and the question was simple. If Boasberg had nothing to hide, then why wasn't he complying? The answer was no longer just about him. The deeper Bondi dug, the more names came up. By the time Pam issued formal indictments, DC was already buzzing. She stood in that same press room, this time with 2 senior DOJ investigators beside her. No cameras got in for the closed-door talks, but reporters hovered outside, catching every word through a cracked door. Bondi's voice stayed cool. No drama, no heat, just straight talk. "We believe Judge James Boasberg has deliberately messed with federal investigations, used his role to protect certain people, and put a dent in our justice system's trust. The Department of Justice is moving forward with charges." The list was brief: obstruction of justice, misuse of his judge job, power, knowingly hiding evidence, and neglecting to recuse himself from a case with obvious personal ties. In a matter of hours, legal offices nationwide were buzzing. Law firms sent panicked memos to their employees. Judges met behind closed doors to untangle the mess. And in government offices, emails bearing Boasberg's name started vanishing or getting hidden behind locked access. But what set this apart, what made it hit home, was what came next. Bondi's office dropped a handful of internal messages, all cleared for public eyes. Nothing secret, but plenty shady. There were hints that hearings got shuffled to line up with certain legal squad schedules, a text saying, "Keep this in my room, too dicey for another judge," and a quick email to an old work buddy labeled personal that suggested syncing court dates with upcoming political shifts. It was not a slam dunk gotcha in itself, but to regular people it looked like a judge's robe hiding dirty tricks. Meanwhile, Boasberg went dark. No press release, no show in court, no flat out, no way. His clerk sent out a statement. Judge Boasberg has always behaved with honor and will make his response in the proper legal forums. But that fanned the flames. People wanted him to grab a mic, defend himself, or at least show he cared to respond. Instead, his friends responded for him. Some big-name TV voices started calling it a witch hunt, saying Bondi was making her office a sword, trying to scare judges who didn't roll with conservative frequency. But for every hater she gained, a bigger cheer section formed. Ordinary people, veterans, business owners, border agents, even former clerks from Boasberg's past, started speaking up. Some defended him, but more shared stories, some vague, some clear, about low-profile calls that never made the headlines but changed real lives. A Laredo court translator swore she'd seen documents vanish from a deportation case that was shoved to Boasberg's desk at the last minute. An Ohio paralegal swore her office was told to wait to file because a friendly judge wanted to take charge. These were not huge bombshells, they were subtle hints, but collectively, they formed a suspicious picture. And Pam Bondi? She wasn't slowing down. She gave one final sit-down chat before ducking out of the spotlight. The interviewer asked if she worried about the political fallout of charging a judge. Her answer was short and sweet. "Let the fallout come. I'd rather lose my job than lose my nerve." That line landed hard. It was on mugs, stickers, and ads by lunchtime. Her doubters tried to poke fun, but it was too late. It stuck. Inside the courthouse, gears started turning for pre-trial stuff. It'd be a slow grind. Judges don't go to trial every day, and even fewer get hit with actual charges. But it was happening, and eyes were glued. The sides were drawn now. You were either Team Bondi, thinking the courts were ripe for a major wake-up call, or Team Boasberg, taking the bench's side against what some saw as a politically motivated takedown. But in the midst of all the noise of people taking sides, a more muted mood brewed. Because what came next wasn't about courtrooms, it was about trust. The trial hadn't even begun, but the ripples were already spreading. In a quiet courtroom in Alexandria, Virginia, Judge Boasberg finally emerged. He didn't come in through the front. Marshals escorted him in through a side hall, skirting the swarm of reporters outside. His suit was pressed, but his vacant, tired face told a different tale. The man who'd once made calls on some of the country's most difficult legal rulings, now himself, was in the hot seat. Lawyers alongside him, jaw set tight. The charges were read, straight, no fanfare. And the judge hearing the case didn't bat an eye. No theatrics, no television drama, just facts, motions, and paperwork. Boasberg entered a not guilty plea. Outside, the crowd was a mixed bag. Protesters carried signs, fans, news vans clogging the street. Some held up placards such as, "No more shadow justice." Others waved flags and chanted Bondi's name. You could feel the gap, but underneath it all, everyone was asking the same question. Can we trust the folks behind the bench? To most Americans, the courts were always out of reach. Judges weren't politicians, no rallies, no Twitter battles, no late-night TV appearances. They just made rulings and people pretty much went along with it, or at least didn't fight. But now, it was like the curtain got pulled back. Bondi kept a low profile after the arraignment. No press conferences, no more interviews, just her team pushing on, steady and sure. But privately, she reaped what she'd sown. She didn't just file charges. She opened a door no one wanted to admit was there. One morning, her aide entered with a padded envelope, sender unidentified. A handwritten note inside, shaking cursive, from a retired court clerk in Santa Fe. It read, "I saw Judge Boasberg overrule a colleague in 2017 on an immigration hold. The case didn't make the news, no publicity. The man was released, and 2 months later he murdered a sheriff's deputy in Oklahoma. We all knew, but nobody spoke up." Bondi didn't need to send that scathing letter to the world. She didn't have to. Stories like it were leaking out on their own, one at a time. Not all solid, not all neat, but falling into place. Rumors of special treatment, off-the-record lunches with federal prosecutors, calls that circumvented the books, and decisions, always decisions, that tilted just enough to make you wonder, but not enough to force a spotlight. Boasberg didn't comment. His lawyers tossed out terse statements, labeling the case a reckless overreach, vowing he'd done nothing illegal, and portraying Bondi as a political attack dog. But they couldn't dodge the messages, couldn't account for the peculiar scheduling anomalies, couldn't account for why sealed court records had left before Signalgate hearings in D.C. people started taking sides. Some legal experts warned that if Bondi did this, it'd open a door nobody was ready for, one where any judge could be a target for backlash. Others shot back that holding people accountable wasn't a threat to the system, it was its backbone. Senators split too. Some had her back, others wanted her office under the microscope instead. Still, she didn't blink. Underneath all the noise and headlines, something bigger had switched. Regular folks, ones who never cared a whit about court proceedings or judges, were now glued to C-SPAN, scrolling through transcripts following each twist. It wasn't about Bondi now, or even Boasberg. It was about whether power had a collar. In coffee shops and kitchens and break rooms nationwide, folks were discussing justice like they hadn't in years. But one last piece had to drop. The confrontation that'd decide whether this was drama or a game changer. It was a casual spring evening when the verdict was read. No flashy lights, no winner's music, no tap of the gavel, and people stirring in their seats. Judge Boasberg wasn't nailed on everything. Charges were dropped. Insufficient concrete evidence, important texts deleted before the DOJ could get to them. But two stuck, hiding evidence knowingly and misusing his judge role. The courtroom was quiet as it was read aloud by the clerk. Boasberg didn't blink. His lawyers hung their heads. The penalty? His bench was gone, permanently prohibited from lawyering, with a call for a closer look at his previous decisions. No jail, but no comeback either. Pam Bondi didn't party, no press conference, no hype. She just went to her office, looked out at the Jefferson Memorial and said, "That's one." She knew this wasn't about one man. Never had been. In the weeks that followed, something strangely cool happened. People quit the screaming just for a little while. Not about party lines or courthouse politics, but about what's true. For once, people peeked behind the curtain, not some wild conspiracy or puppet show, just the sloppy human machinery running our courts. A clerk in the Boston court, speaking anonymously, gave a short interview. He wasn't a bad guy, she said. He thought he was doing right. But that's not enough when you've got that robe. That was the takeaway Bondi wanted people to grab. Real power isn't about camera speeches. It's about your picks when nobody's looking. Boasberg went with quiet cover-ups and shielding. Bondi picked openness, even if it put her in the crosshairs. She got letters from families who'd felt ignored by the system. A guy in Wichita whose son got shipped out despite a clean slate. A Bakersfield woman whose sister was hurt by a person let go free under a delayed hearing that fell through Boasberg's courtroom, no trace left behind. These weren't just sad tales. They were real fallout, real people. For Bondi, that was the whole point. In one of her rare public appearances since the trial, she addressed first-year law students at the University of Florida. No script, just her voice. Don't look for headlines, she told them. Look for what's real, because if you don't, somebody else will spin it for you. The room went quiet. Some wrote it down. Others just gazed, eyes wide. Critics still called her wild, but others started asking tougher things. How many judges were making hush-hush calls in the law's dark corners? How many rulings put the system more than what's fair? The Justice Department unveiled a new quiet check system for complaints about federal judges. Not front-page news, but it counted. Someone was watching now. That's what accountability's about. Not scaring people, not getting even, but being there, watching, not blinking. Pam Bondi left the system a scar, yes, but sometimes a scar is what it needs to remember where it's vulnerable. As things settled down, the story fell from the front pages. Boasberg packed up and left D.C., his name fading from the chatter. But the echo of his downfall remained on in the courtrooms where others now hold sway robes sharp. Still theirs the decisions to make. Let this be. Even the highest seat can fall. And when it does, it isn't the fall. It's what we learn from it. If you think justice should always have a payday, don't sit silent. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the real stuff.